Hey guys, and welcome to something a little bit different from me today. Instead of a deck profile, I'm going to do a bunch of stuff on the maths of Yu-Gi-Oh, which I don't think a lot of people have really looked into. Strangely enough, I was actually kind of surprised. But anyway, before I get into the actual maths of it, I want to say that I calculate all of this using a hypergeometric calculator, which I will link in the description below. If you guys want, I can do an explanation video on how to calculate stuff yourself, but I'll just do some of the raw numbers today. Also, this is all done with a 40 card deck. I do some stuff about the upstart afterwards, but that's towards the end. And also, this is all assuming randomness. I know a lot of people do complain that, oh no, you can't calculate for how humans shuffle because that's not necessarily random. I'm not into any of that. We don't know the order of cards once you shuffled it, so I'm assuming randomness. Okay, so the very basics. Say you run a one-off in a 40 card deck. How likely is it that you'll see that card in your opening hand? Very surprising. Strange enough, it's 12.5% opening in 5 cards, which is 1 in 8 games, which I found actually kind of interesting. But what if you run a 2-off? Then you have a 23% chance of seeing that in your opening hand going first. If you run a full play set, then it goes up to 33%. It's actually slightly more, closer to a third. So if we think of these as roughly 1 in 8 hands, just shy of 1 in 4 hands, and then 1 in 3 hands. So obviously, if you go to a 3-round match, or a 3-game match, then you should be seeing this in your opening hand, at least one of those. Also, a lot of people talk about things like clogging. So if you don't want multiples in your opening hand, if you have 2 in your deck, then you run a 1% chance of clogging, so that's 1 in 100 hands will have 2 or more. But if you run 3, then you have a 3% chance of opening it, so that's roughly 1 in 30 hands, which isn't, it's not actually too bad at all. However, what if you want to go past this? You want to go past 3? Well, that's when it starts to get a little bit interesting. Say if you run 3 Deneb 1 Rotor, so essentially 4 copies of the same card, then you have a 42% chance of seeing this card in your opening hand. So you should be seeing it even more, essentially, if you go to a 3-round match. I personally believe this is one of the reasons that you didn't see as many Infernoid tops as maybe could have been, because they had 3 Reasoning and Monster Gate, which is obviously 4 really good cards to open with. They did have the Light Swan engine, but yeah. But you're actually slightly unlikely to see one of those cards in your hand. But say if you go up to 5 copies of a card, oh yeah, and if you have 4 copies, then you have a 6% chance of clogging, opening 2 or more in your opening hand of 5. But let's say if you run 5 copies, so then you have basically 50-50 chance of seeing this card in your hand or not. Which, well, I think it's quite cruel that obviously Tellarknights now have this instead of, well, a full complement. But yes, so you have 50% chance of seeing the opening hand, so even in a game like just a 2-game match, you should be seeing this in one of your opening hands. And then it goes all the way up to a 10% chance to clog, so obviously 1 in 10 games. But say you run the full complement, say Tellarknights at full strength. This is where it gets really, really interesting for me, because then you have a 57% chance of seeing this card in a 5-card opening hand, which is important, because that means it's more likely that you will see a copy of this in your opening hand than you won't, which means that all of a sudden Tellarknights doing Deneb set 3 or 4, whatever, makes a lot more sense, because that play was a lot more likely than it was unlikely. So that's running it at 6. I'm going to skip 7. I'm actually going to switch archetypes as well. But say you want to run 8 copies. You then start to deal with clogging a lot more. But I'll go for Monarchs, because this also applies to them. Let's go 3 Erebus. Where's Aether? And then, say, 2 Thestalos. So we've got 8 copies. If you are going first, then you have a 69% chance of seeing one of these cards in your opening hand. And this is actually the ratio I run in my Monarchs that I run Vassals at. Because 8 cards is approximately 1/5 of your deck. and you will draw 5 cards, which means that the likelihood of seeing one of these in any given hand is very, very likely, actually. So if you want to see this, especially a type of card in your opening hand, then the minimum you want to be running is 8. Simply because, that's the best ratio. However, you then run a 25% chance, that's 1 in 4 hands, you're going to see at least 2 of these. But in Monarchs, that isn't necessarily an issue. You can also apply this to pendulum scales. Although it doesn't guarantee anything, that does mean that you should be seeing more of it. However, if you go up to, say, 9 copies, that's another Thestalos, that's 74% chance of seeing an opening hand. 10 copies, then you have 78, 11, 81, 12, 85, let's go to the board, 13, 87, 14, 90, and so on and so forth, obviously, until you reach 100%. However, the interesting number that I should have gone back to was 13. Because of decks like Burning Abyss, you're going to want more than 1 copy in your hand, so you want to have that guarantee of it. Well, if you run 13 copies of a card, say 13 Mana Branches in your deck, then you have a 53% chance of opening with 2 or more, which means that all of a sudden you're likely to run that Dante play first turn, which obviously is the most desirable way to do that. And then you can use the calculator if you want to go further than that, if you want to calculate 6-card hands, etc., etc. So depending on how much you can afford to see multiples in your hand, if you need a card to start off with, the ideal ratio is about 8 to 12. Either 8 copies or 12 copies, depending on how much you can afford to clog with them. But let's go on to the next bit I want to do, which is Upstart Goblin. How much does that 1 Upstart affect your game? Well, say you have a 3 of, so if I just get rid of all these in your deck, say 3 Erebus, and you need to see that first turn, so you're going to run the Upstart. Okay, so if this is normally a 12.5% chance of seeing this, if it's a one-off, that goes up to a whopping 12.8% chance of seeing it with the Upstart. Obviously, the Upstart is going to go down 39 cards, but it only adds 0.3. So if you run 2 copies, then chance of seeing this card with the Upstart going first in a 5-card hand goes from 23% to 24%, adding just 0.5 if you go down to the small details. And then if you run 3 copies of something plus the Upstart, you go from a 33% chance to a 34% chance seeing this in your opening hand. Overall, if you run 3 costs of your card in your deck and you need to see that first turn, say like Reasoning or whatever, and you want the Upstart is going to give you this card in a situation that you would not get it normally, 1 in 142 games, which I have to admit does seem a little bit extreme. However, that's the way the maths tells it, because overall you only have a 0.7% chance increase with the Upstart in there. Right, well, that's a bunch of the basics I've done. If there's any extra stuff you want me to explain, or if you want any more ratios explained or whatever, then feel free to ask me to do that. I'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much for watching. Ta-da!